Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Common Sense, our monthly program here on Rio Grande TV Cable Channel 17, sponsored by Ohio Valley Bank, where we talk about current issues within the business industry as they relate to banking and how that kind of impacts businesses' ability to get loans and do business on a daily basis. And today we're joined by Chris Preston, and Chris is the Vice President of Branch Administration and Business Development with Ohio Valley Bank. And you might recognize Chris. He's been with us here before on Common Sense, and he's back for what's starting to become a fall tradition here on the show. And Chris likes to visit us in October because October is the National Get Smart About Credit Month.
Yes, it is.
And I know a year ago Chris talked to us about credit and gave us some really good pointers on credit and what we can do to improve that. And today we're going to kind of follow up on those discussions. Today we're going to talk again about some credit reports, credit scores, and the recent Equifax breach that many of you have all been seeing and hearing about on television. It's been kind of popular in the news. So good afternoon, Chris, and welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks for having me.
All right. So Chris, why don't you start out the show today by reminding us what you do with the Ohio Valley Bank, and maybe just a brief history there to kind of refresh the viewer's memory of how long you've been with the bank and who you are and where you come from here.
Well, I currently reside in Ona, West Virginia, but I am a Guy County native, so I've got some ties here. I grew up in Vinton, which is just down the road. I had an opportunity to come on board with the bank back in '98, and I am a vice president and do administration and obviously do some business development. I live in Ona, but I met my wife while I was there, moving from here to there with the bank. Had an opportunity to go there to help run a particular facility that we purchased from another institution.
Okay.
So it's been very good for me. I have my wife Tiffany, met her while I was there. She was going to Marshall, but she's actually from Point Pleasant. So
okay,
she's got
good.
local ties too. Have two small kids, Colton, who's 8, and Chloe, who's 4, who's the boss of the family.
Okay.
Yeah, she's a go-getter. But have an opportunity to be with the bank, and I do oversee a few of our locations. I have great managers there, great staff, really help them develop those markets in which they serve, from growing the deposit side, the lending side, and of course really making sure our customer service is on point.
Mm-hmm. Great, absolutely. Well, since the last time you were here with us on Common Sense, you know, I mentioned a little bit ago something big's kind of happened in the banking industry, or as it relates to the banking industry, more of the credit industry. Huge data breach at Equifax that's impacted just 1 or 2 million Americans.
It's quite a few, quite a few.
Quite a few. But can you tell us a little bit about the situation and maybe what we can do to...
So we'll talk about Equifax. Equifax is one of the 3 major credit bureaus. You have Equifax, you have Experian, you have TransUnion. Equifax, during the summer months, had a breach, some cybercrime that obviously attacked them, and they came out early September just to notify everyone so they can make the adjustments they need to make and make sure they protect themselves. So yeah, it's unfortunate, but hopefully people are taking the steps they need to protect their identity. Right,
because as you know, we've talked about in the past, you know, your credit is a big part of you, and it really impacts your daily activities financially.
It does. It's your thumbprint.
Right.
I mean, basically tells the financial institutions, obviously, what you've done in the past and what they expect out of future on you.
So not only can a bad credit score cost you more money on a loan by a higher interest rate, it also impacts your insurance rates and everything. So it's...
Whether you can get cable or not.
And whether you can get...
That's important.
Right. Can you still get a cell phone?
Maybe.
Maybe. Okay. All right. So it is very important.
It is.
With this breach, what kind of information did these criminals, these cyber criminals, come up with and secure about us?
Unfortunately, Equifax came out and released as far as what they were able to gather, and it's the important stuff. It's your social security number, it's your address, it's your driver's license information, credit card information. So it's really valuable stuff that you don't want out there, but unfortunately is. And I think the latest number they came out with was most recent was like 148 million people were impacted by it.
So you've pretty much got a 50-50 chance.
Got a good chance of being obviously impacted somewhat. And, and obviously asking me what we can do, one of the most important things you really need to do is go on to Equifax, and we'll put a website up here that you can go to, and this particular website that Equifax has created, you can go in and actually see if you were one of the ones impacted. If you're not an internet user or don't have access to that, we also have a 1-800 number up there you can call. But the most important thing, if you take anything from today, is you need to do your due diligence and go on and see if you were one of the ones that obviously was impacted and your information is compromised.
Right. So, and maybe let me take a step back for our viewers. You know, in the past, we've heard about the different data breaches with, say, Target. You know, where people who shopped at Target, their identity and their information was compromised. You know, me personally, you know, I looked it up. You know, I used the link on Ohio Valley Bank's website and went in and put my information in and saw that I was one of the individuals that's impacted by this as well. I've never done business with Equifax. How do they have my information?
Well, obviously Equifax is the ones who's deriving at the numbers in which financial institutions use. So if you've received or loans in the past, your information is going to be captured by them. So
right. So anybody who has ever gotten a loan or has any kind of history financially, Equifax has your information.
Yeah, and don't forget your spouses. You know, don't just look at yours. Look at your spouse's information. Make sure that they wasn't compromised. Because again, what you want to do is protect yourself, not just for now, but obviously for the future too.
Okay. So our children.
Yes.
Some of them may or may not have a credit thumbprint.
Yeah, I think a lot of people lose sight of thinking about their children. And honestly, children are the ones that's probably compromised the most, because parents don't typically check into their credit score because they're not getting credit for 15, 16 years, depending on the age of them. But if you're a criminal looking to compromise someone's information, that's the first place you're going to look, because it's going to take years to find that obviously someone had some identity theft. So you definitely go ahead and take the extra steps and throw in their information to make sure that you're looking out for their best interest also.
Right. So if nothing shows up, that's a good thing.
That's a good thing. But again, you have to do your due diligence, and it's not just about now, it's about ongoing.
Right. Okay. Very good. Any kind of tips that you'd have as far as things that we can do to kind of help, you know, maybe protect ourselves from situations like that?
Well, you know, we talk about just awareness. You want to make sure that you're reviewing your credit report often, and there are several sites that you can go to make sure that you're protected. A particular site that I use is Credit Karma. It's a free service. Now, when I say free service, there's obviously some downfall to that, because that company has to get paid somehow. So they use my information to market. So I may get some emails come to me from time to time that shop me for credit card information, things like that. So it doesn't cost me money as far as monetarily. I'm not paying a subscription fee, but obviously they're using my information to benefit them in some way. But the good thing about Credit Karma, you can obviously go to and see obviously every month whether the information that you have is correct. There is a annualcreditreport.com that you can go to. This is every U.S. citizen has an opportunity to get one free credit report every year. So if you don't want to use a service like Credit Karma, or if you don't want to go to Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian, which is the three major credit bureaus, you can obviously go to annualcreditreport.com and you can get your credit report annually. And again, this is an opportunity for you to go through and make sure what information is on there is accurate.
Okay. So we can do that, if I remember correctly, pull one from each of the different reporting agencies through annualcreditreport.com,
yes,
one each year.
And you can go to, obviously, Equifax, Experian, TransUnion, all those individually, and obviously you can gather that information, but the annual credit report obviously is going to be a hub for all those. And again, there's an 800 number if you're not necessarily in tune with having the internet. And something I didn't mention earlier that I think you need to be conscious of is make sure when you put these website information in, it's exactly how it is on the screen, because with the fraud that's already been out there, people are going to create fake websites, and they're going to capture your information, and obviously that's going to put you in a risky situation. They could capture that, and obviously you can get fraud that way. Right.
So the link that we're seeing on the screen right now is definitely the link that you need to go to.
That's correct.
Sometimes there's little variations in words and different things trying to bait people into clicking on another fraudulent link, and then they just got more of your information.
They are sneaky. You got to be careful.
They do. They certainly are. They certainly are. You know, one of the things that we've seen with this breach, and a lot of people that have been talking about it, is advising the consumer to put a freeze on their credit. Could you talk a little bit about what that means and what that looks like to me as an individual if I have my credit frozen?
Yeah, first let me say, as far as I'm not necessarily a financial advisor, the information I'm giving you today is based on the 20 years experience I'm coming up on having. So it's a lot of grunt work I've done throughout the years and seen throughout the credit reports and how it's affected your credit score and things like that. But a freeze, or like we call in the industry a fraud alert, is basically going in and notifying the credit bureaus. And again, you would have to do not just one. So if you go to Equifax and put a freeze on it, you're going to want to go to obviously the other ones, which is TransUnion and Experian, and put a block per se on your credit account. And what this does is it protects you. So if me as a lender, as a Ohio Valley Bank, has an opportunity to do a loan for you, I'm going to try to pull your information, and it's going to alert me that obviously you have frozen your account, and it's going to take me through some extra steps to make sure that I'm doing my part to make sure that Brad is who Brad says he is, and I'm not pulling someone this information. You're not trying to defraud somebody.
Right. So they're going to ask you the extra questions, probe for more additional information that they see in your file to verify who you are.
Yeah. And depends on how you place it. It could theoretically just block us where we don't see anything.
Wow. Interesting stuff. Well, it's time for us to take a short station break right now. And when we come back, we'll continue our discussion with Chris Preston from Ohio Valley Bank. All right, welcome back to Common Sense. Today we're here with Chris Preston from Ohio Valley Bank, and we're talking a little bit about your personal credit and some of the data breaches and information concerns that we've had here over the past few years in our economy. And it's kind of a scary time, and but you know, with a little bit of due diligence, we can kind of prevent some of those things that might cause us some problems in the future. And continue our discussion, Chris, with the data breaches and the security information. Are you guys at Ohio Valley Bank seeing a lot more identity theft here in the most recent time, where people are trying to, you know, get something for nothing, I guess you could say?
I mean, we've always experienced obviously some kind of fraud, but fortunately in this particular scenario with Equifax breach, we haven't experienced much at all. But it's still early, and obviously we're getting into the holiday season. This is where really the fraud is ramped up. So you have to be obviously careful as far as what information you're sharing, and also make sure that what you're opening up, you're truly opening up, because the holiday season is very popular when it comes to fraud.
Okay. And one thing I know we'd spoke about at lunch, obviously, you know, if we're diligent in looking at our credit, whether it's through Credit Karma, you know, getting our score there, we go to a bank to get a loan, you know, we're going to see some different variations in our credit numbers that we have. Is that a reason to be concerned, or is that just kind of normal?
No, I mean, obviously, again, we talk about the three credit bureaus, Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian. They all have a variation of what derives their score. You know, your average score is going to be in the 650, 680 range, but the range is a little different. It goes from 300 to 850. So depending on if you're pulling Equifax or if you're pulling TransUnion, your score may be about 20 points different, and that's largely because they're model. So the several ways that what they determine is as far as the amount that you owe, your credit mix, the time frame in which you pay down your loans, your balance in relation to obviously what you owe on your credit cards. There's percentages that every one of them have, like 35% may be TransUnion and 30% may be obviously Experian, but they all have some variation. They're all within reason, but nothing to be concerned about obviously if you pull one and one's 20 points off from the other one.
Okay, so if I'm, let's say, chronically late paying my credit card bill every month, what kind of impact is that going to have on my credit?
Well, you really need to define late, because I've had a lot of customers that say, hey, I'm 2 days late on my credit card bill or my installment loan or whatever. How's that going to impact my credit score? It really doesn't. Obviously, there's interest that you could accrue in addition because you went past your date. There could be late fees involved, obviously, with your particular loan, depending on the style it is. But really, what we look for in a credit world is if you're 30 days late. So as long as you're within that 30 days of your due date, you're not necessarily going to get a ding per se on your credit file. It's going to be more of how much more interest you're going to pay and if there was a potential late fee. Right.
And some of those credit card bills, obviously, even if it's just a small shopping cart at a particular department store, you may have a $50 bill, but your late fee may be $30 or $40 for being late.
Absolutely, and they could increase your interest rate. So where you may start at a lower interest rate, 0% even, and then they've got it built into their contract that if you go over so many days of your payment, then they'll obviously raise the interest rate, and it could be anywhere north of 20%, which you obviously don't want to do.
Okay. You also, referenced Credit Karma earlier and talking about, how we can see our credit score. Are there different limitations as to how many times you can go in and look through Credit Karma, say on a regular basis?
So Credit Karma, again, this is the service I use. There's other ones that are obviously out there, but Credit Karma in itself sends me an email every month, and it gives me up to, hey, it's time to review your credit score. Again, when we talk about the breach, and really going forward, you always want to make sure that you're going into it. So it's just really a monthly reminder. So the great thing is I go into, and obviously I'll put in my information and make sure that my password's correct, and it'll pull up, and I go down through and make sure that the loans that I have that are active, and there's nothing out there that I wasn't expecting.
Now, can that be set up, and maybe you do or don't know, I'm just a curious mind right here, but if something comes up, if there's a new account that's opened up under your name, are there mechanisms within that that'll alert you that something's happened or a change has been made?
Again, if you go to Credit Karma, they have mechanisms in place. If you go to Equifax, Experian, TransUnion, they're all going to have, you have some kind of agreement per se, you set up something with them, because through this breach, Equifax, if you are impacted, they're offering free monitoring services to those people who have been theoretically, obviously hacked, but they are offering free services, so it will alert you obviously going forward. But I like to take some accountability on myself, and I want to make sure that obviously I go into and make sure that I look at myself, without something alerting to me. So do your due diligence. Make sure you're looking at it often as much as possible, especially when you're getting into the holiday season. Okay.
So you mentioned the free credit monitoring that Equifax is offering, and if you're an impacted individual, is that something that you would recommend signing up for that through Equifax to get those alerts, to get that monitoring, so you know if you do become impacted, so you can address it quickly?
I guess I can only speak personally as far as what I, again, not a financial advisor, what I recommend. If I'm going to be impacted, I want to take every step possible to protect my identity. So, if you have confidence, obviously, in Equifax and the breach that they have and the systems they have in place, yes. But understand that it's not just Equifax, because the breach may have happened there, but there's other credit bureaus, such as TransUnion and Experian. So you need to go to both those other two and make sure that you're somewhat flagged in the event that someone pulls your credit, or obviously a trade line is opened up in your name.
Okay. Well, so it's really about staying with it and keeping on it. And right now, if you're one of the impacted individuals, you just really need to be aware.
Well, even if you're not one of the impacted individuals,
even if you're not,
this is really bringing awareness to the area and to the country that we need to stay on top of this. And if your information is compromised and there is an issue, you want to catch it early, because with identity theft, if you catch this years down the road, it could be a nightmare to try to obviously bounce back and try to reclaim your credit per se and build your credit score back up.
Right. So if we do see something on our credit that isn't right, what are the steps that we should start taking to get that addressed and get it removed?
So as you're reviewing your credit file and you see something that, say it's not your loan, you see a credit card that pops up and you obviously think, well, this isn't mine. So you can dispute it. Again, what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to go to each website, because being the Equifax, the Experian, the TransUnion, because just because you dispute on one, those companies don't necessarily communicate to each other and stop the other one. You want to make sure that you go on and dispute on that one. And it's not a lengthy process, but there may be some information that you need to obviously provide to them to make sure that that is indeed not yours. So there may be some follow-up, but you can go to their websites and there's a dispute link that you go to, and they'll walk you through as far as, and you'll need to obviously have your credit file, because it'll have some information on there that you'll need to put on there to make sure you're disputing the right thing.
So, like you said, the sooner you can get on these things and get them addressed,
correct,
the better off it's going to be. That's right. Okay. A lot of times we work with individuals with the Small Business Development Center, and a lot of times they come to us, looking for a loan, looking for grants, which we don't really usually give them grants. But we really come to the realization that a loan's what you're going to need.
Yes.
First of all, credit, again, is very important to getting a loan. We come across a lot of individuals that have not very good credit, so their chances of getting a loan are the same. I guess your credit and your chances of getting a loan directly correlate, right?
Yes.
Not very good chance.
Correct.
But also, sometimes, unfortunately, we come across some individuals that have a bankruptcy on their file. Could you talk a little bit about how bankruptcy kind of impacts your credit, and maybe how long is that going to stick around, and how long are you going to be suffering from the ill effects of a bankruptcy?
Bankruptcy, yeah. A bankruptcy isn't. There's so many derogatory tones with bankruptcy, and I don't want people to feel like because they've had bankruptcy that it's the end of the world. Bad things happen to good people.
That's
and
right.
Sometimes you just have to weather that storm. The things that we look for from a financial institution is what you've done post the bankruptcy. Are you reestablishing your credit? How long has it been since your bankruptcy? So really, it's just, I guess, buckling down and trying to change what had happened in the past and get yourself in a better situation. And the more time that you have behind, and the more trade lines that you have behind the bankruptcy, the more apt that you are to get a loan and get better pricing. To answer the second part of the question, you asked me as far as how long. You're looking at about 7 years is what you typically see.
Okay, so about 7 years. So, and I know we've talked about this in the past, but as somebody that's dealing with making loans to individuals, if I'm wanting to come to the bank and get a loan, I know a lot of other factors are in play as far as equity and different things like that. What kind of a credit score range do I really need to get myself into as far as me being a bankable customer that's able to get a loan, whether it's for a personal auto or for a mortgage, something like that? Where do I really need to get myself into that range?
So every financial institution varies. Credit score is important, but the way we see it at Ohio Valley Bank, it's not the end-all be-all. It's really what's in your credit file. Have you earned the right to obviously get it? Now, what we use the credit score for is a lot of times is guidance on how we price it, because the lower the score is, typically the riskier the deal is potentially for the bank. So we want to obviously price it accordingly. But as far as scoring, nationally you're looking at 650 to 670 is probably going to be your average. 700 is where you start getting into the better credit. 750 is typically what you see as far as the best pricing. So if you was to walk into to get a mortgage or whatever, if you have a 750, you're probably going to get A-tier pricing, which is obviously your goal. You want to spend less money on what you're borrowing. So 650, 680 is average. When you get in above 750, I know we talk about 800 being so great. It's just gravy the way we see it, because you've earned, and a lot of times a 750, there's just very minute difference between 750 and 780, because it's really just longevity that you had necessarily on the credit files that you've obtained.
Okay, so kind of to put that in real world terms, I mean, if you can get even up into a better credit rating category if you're going to borrow money for, say, a home mortgage, and if you're financing $150,000 for 30 years, a quarter of a percent of interest makes
a big difference.
It's right. I mean, we're talking what, maybe $20,000 in interest over that term.
I mean, obviously, I don't have those numbers in front of me, but if you just look at it simplistic, as far as a quarter percent may matter on obviously a $5,000 car loan, a small car loan. But on a $50,000 to $100,000 to $250,000 mortgage, a quarter percent will make a big difference. So yeah, you definitely want to make sure you're, again, raising your credit score up and trying to get the best rate you can, obviously, because that impacts you financially going forward.
Right. So it's really a big difference, and that's one thing that that I've tried to instill in my children.
Yes.
They're young adults. They're in college and just recently graduated from college, but it's never too early to start building a credit history and to start establishing yourself and putting your footprint into that world, because whenever it's time to go out and buy a car on your own or buy a house, you want to have some history behind you.
Yeah, and obviously the more history you have, the more lendable you are. And I've had many conversations with young adults that sit across me at desk, and as they're getting their first or second loan, and just to remind them, obviously, again, this is your thumbprint. So as you move forward, this is going to be dictate obviously what you can borrow and how much you can borrow and at what rate you can borrow. So if you go into the right mindset and you obviously take care of your credit, then you won't really hear no a lot as long as you financially can afford it. But if you obviously have if you trip up somewhere along the ways, you're going to have problems either getting a loan or obviously getting the right loan that you need.
All right. Well, Chris, as always, thanks for joining us today. We had a great bit of information there. And again, this is Brad Bapst for Common Sense, and we'll see you back here next month. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks.